Collect requirements. This is a process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet objectives. We have a very large number of inputs as well as tools and techniques here to produce two basic outputs. It's very important to note that the reason we have so many inputs and tools and techniques, different projects will have different types of requirements that must be captured in different kinds of ways. Project documents as an input to this process kind of refers to the generic catch-all of all of the relevant documentation we've been producing throughout our project so far. If you refer to page 89 within your PMBOK, you'll see in the right column a list of 33 project documents that could be considered here. There's a specific focus on the lessons learned register. So, what worked well in the past? If we had a recent and relevant project experience and we had some type of successful information gathering techniques that we've used to help collect requirements, then we would definitely want to go ahead and reuse that during this project as well. As we look closer at the tools and techniques of this process, it's important to reiterate that there's so many of them because different projects will collect different requirements in different ways. So with data gathering, it may be a matter of simply benchmarking. So we might compare the current state of our organization against a standard. For example, if we were to try to seek an ISO 9000 certification for our organization, we need to look at where we at currently versus where do we want to be. Or perhaps we don't even want to adopt an external standard and we just want to look at a past similar project and kind of use that as a standard. With decision making, there's a number of different ways that a group of people can come to a decision. So, through voting, we can seek unanimity, which is where everybody's going to agree. And of course, this is the most difficult one to reach. A simple majority requires at least a 50% majority of people voting are selecting a single course of action or a single choice, as opposed to a plurality, which just refers to the single largest block of votes. So if we have 3 to 4 different options, the largest block might only be 30 or 40%. In some situations, an autocratic decision making may be more appropriate. This is where one person has a level of authority where they can just go ahead and arbitrarily and unilaterally make that decision for the entire group. Now, it's very important to note that most decisions being made within a project are very multifaceted. So, multi criteria decision analysis will be very important as we look at the various aspects of any decision that we have to make. With data representation, there's a lot of different ways to go ahead and represent the information that we are gathering. So affinity diagrams or mind mapping are very powerful tools, especially when assisted with specialized software. With the interpersonal and team skills, the nominal group technique is a very popular one. This is where we basically start with brainstorming. From here, after we have a number of ideas, we go ahead and we start grouping them into similar categories. Once we have them broken down into categories, we'll go ahead and rank them based upon votes of participants. Those areas, those categories, or those ideas that have the most votes will be further brainstormed, and what we'll do is we'll try to come up with more information about them. Observation or conversation can be very important as well. If we think about this in terms of a process improvement initiative, so if our project is to support some type of process improvement or perhaps performance measurement, job shadowing or participant observer becomes extremely important. Try and figure out how do people do work right now in the current state of the organization. Conversation is another great way to do it. If we need to figure out how the work is being done, one of the best ways is to have a conversation with one or more practitioners and talk to them about it. So, what do you do? How do you do it? Why do you do it this way? And actually watch them to see if they do it in the same manner that they articulate it. With facilitation, there's a number of really awesome ways to go ahead and capture requirements. So, cross functional meetings, we don't want to have a whole lot of people with the exact same skill set. We want to have a cross functional type of meeting. So, perhaps the software engineers, perhaps the product owners, or whoever's representing the customer, perhaps somebody representing the business, perhaps somebody on the back end side of it. The quality function deployment is a very popular method used heavily within Six Sigma as part of a house of quality. The joint application development, another very popular technique. And then we also have user stories, which we see substantially in the agile methodologies and frameworks. With context diagrams, this is where we kind of look at what are we providing in the form of a deliverable and exactly how is it going to fit within our organization and how is it going to fill some type of a void, who will be interacting with it and in what capacity in order to deliver some type of a value. Finally, we have our prototypes. Prototypes will allow us to go ahead and capture further requirements. So if we think about this in terms of building a scale model, and some of the larger organizations that are trying to break into the privatized space exploration business, they do a lot of scale model rocket launches to try and capture further requirements that they have to have. The outputs from this process include requirements documentation. So anytime we capture a requirement, it is very important that we actually document how this requirement is meeting the business need. If it is not tied specifically to a business need, then why do we need to do this? And at that point, that requirement should not be within the scope of the project. Everything should be traceable to a specific need that this project is meant to satisfy. Now, the requirements tend to be broken down. How you break down these requirements will probably be defined in your requirements management plan. Per the PMBOK, these are some pretty basic categories of requirements. So, with the business requirement, what do we have to do in order for this deliverable to give us some level of value? Now, this could be a little bit different than the stakeholder requirement. Stakeholder requirements are gathered from the human beings that are around us, those people, groups, and organizations that are somehow being impacted by some aspect of our project. So, with these stakeholder requirements, we're going to evaluate them in a different capacity, but they still must be tied to a specific business need. When it comes to a solution requirement, when we talk about functional versus non functional solutions, this can refer to primarily software development. So, a functional solution or functional work being done. This is where we are adding code or we're generating some type of value. We are creating something as opposed to a non-functional work. So this could be refactoring of code, this could be documentation, or this could be any other number of things where we're not directly building towards our deliverable. The project requirements. So what do we have to do to deliver within the objectives that we were given originally? So think about the schedule, think about the budget, think about quality standards or any contractual obligations that we may have. What do we need to do to ensure that we're delivering on these requirements? With the transition requirements, what do we have to do once the project is done, once the deliverable has been completed? Do we have a 30, 60, 90-day warranty period where we have to have engineers on staff to troubleshoot? Or is it simply a matter of delivering it to the customer's location, dusting our hands off, and calling it a day? And finally, we have our quality requirements. So, what is going to be success? What's the criteria? What is the yardstick that we're going to be using to identify that condition where we can say that yes, this deliverable has been successfully completed? Now, down the very bottom, we have another note, and it's not necessarily a type of requirement, but any assumptions that we're making about these requirements. So, those things that we're taking for granted to be true, even lacking any type of real evidence. Or dependencies or constraints between requirements. So, in some situations, one requirement will absolutely be dependent upon another, or one can absolutely rule out another. So, we have to do a constant evaluation on all of these requirements that we're documenting. The requirements traceability matrix gives us a mechanism to go ahead and link these products requirements and all of the requirements overall to a specific business need. We can also go ahead and look at what project objectives are being impacted or where does this fall within the WBS. Areas of design or product development, and the test strategy or test scenario. So how are we going to ensure that yes, this requirement has been fulfilled satisfactorily? The high level requirements to more detailed requirements. So, in the very beginning of the project, especially while we're drafting the charter, we're going to be dealing with very high level requirements. So, perhaps we need an 80-story office building with at least 200,000 square feet of office space. But then as time goes by, now we're looking at number of elevators, fire extinguishers, electrical outlets, land drops, and so on. So, we're going to get the more detailed requirements as we move forward. Some other columns that we can have, and again, this is going to be entirely up to your requirements management plan as to what you need. The PMBOK does not say that you should have one that looks like this or it should have all of this. It just says that you should have one, and the depth of how far it goes should be determined by your own organizational needs. So here we see a pretty generic requirements traceability matrix. Going from left to right, we see a unique identifier. In this case, it went strictly numeric. We can go ahead and assume it would be sequential. Then we have the brief narrative description. What is the requirement here? So in this case, we're trying to improve the button response time on a smartphone to make it go twice as fast. Then we have a source. Now, all requirements are being captured from a human being. A person requests a requirement in the same manner that a person requests a change. You will always have a source, even if that person is making the request based upon the automated output of data collection, whatever it might be, there's still a source. And we need to go ahead and follow up with the stakeholder and let them know whether or not this requirement has been included or excluded from the scope. The business need. If we cannot tie this requirement to a specific business need, then we don't need to be doing this requirement. The project objectives. So completing this requirement, what objective will this impact? It's going to impact the usability of the phone. And this requirement, where is it tied to on the WBS? So within the WBS, it's going to be in the buttons and switches category. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, we haven't done the WBS yet because that's in another two processes. Well, absolutely, but we have to keep in mind planning is a very iterative process. The test strategy, we want to look at the overall usability of the phone. Did we achieve that approximately 2 times speed increase on this smartphone? The responsible organization, we need to go ahead and pin the rose on someone. In this case, it's engineering. If it becomes a situation where is responsible, then nobody is responsible. And we kind of had a bit of a diffusion of responsibility, and it becomes a tragedy of the commons. Now, for the status, we see done. Now, this could be represented as a percentage. It could be the traffic light of red, amber, green. It could be not started, in progress, done. The status is going to be defined as part of that requirements management plan, and whatever your organization deems to be appropriate is going to be perfectly fine. Collect requirements. Learning assessment. Describe the purpose of this process in your own words. The purpose is to gather and document all requirements which must be met for the project to be successful. What similarities do the tools techniques for this process share? The tools are similar in that they are mostly geared around gathering information. What barriers might you face when performing this process? Some barriers you might face are stakeholder conflicts and disagreements, vague or conflicting descriptions of requirements, or possibly even uncooperative stakeholders. In what ways will the requirements traceability matrix be helpful as you manage the project? The matrix helps ensure the requirements are tracked throughout the lifecycle of the project, even from phase to phase. It also helps identify the business value the specific requirement adds to either or both project or business objectives, and provides a structure to manage changes to product scope. To what items should you be referring when collecting requirements? You must refer to the requirements management plan, the stakeholder engagement plan, and the stakeholder register, especially closely while performing this process.